Well, thank you very much for having me. As Jean said, my name is Rebecca Donnenberg. I'm a dietitian, a registered dietitian right here at Orlando Health. I work with our inpatient oncology and hematology team, so thank you so much for having me, and thank you for letting us host all of you this year. It was really a pleasure to have everyone, and we really enjoy being here in the hospital, getting to see our facilities. I know that we're wrapping up a pretty long day, and I just wanted to say an anecdotal moment that they always tend to put the dietitian in a very interesting part during presentations. It's generally right around lunchtime, so I'm glad that I was actually at the end of the day today, because they always want to put the dietitians right when everybody's having food. That being said, there's still snacks out there, so feel free to have some snacks as we round things up today. So I just wanted to talk to you for a few moments about what we can consider as far as your nutritional intake and how that might affect your health, other disease states, in particular ECD. I also want to comment that I'm very pleased that so many other presenters mentioned nutrition in their talks, so thank you for that. We just heard about that in physical activity. I know Cassie talked a little bit about it, as did Diane. So it's really great that everyone pays attention to the fact that it's really important. So my outline today is to talk just a little bit about basic nutrition, and then talk about why that's important, any dietary modifications that we might consider with ECD. Are there any particular diets or diet recommendations based on that? And then potential side effects of therapies, because we heard a lot about clinical trials, medications that are out there, medications that are being investigated, but how does that affect your nutrition, or are there other things that we need to consider when taking those medications? And then symptom management, because Cassie also talked about some of the potential side effects, and what can we do to help mitigate that through our food and intake. And then we'll try to keep a little bit of time for questions. I know we're a little bit behind, so I promise to try not to keep you too late. So first of all, why is nutrition important? Well, overall, everybody needs it. Everybody eats, right? And our bodies need fuel. You need fuel in times of wellness as well as in chronic illnesses. And eating, nutrition, intake, calories, that's your body's fuel. So that's like the gas in your car. So you want to make sure that you're fueling your car well for optimal performance. So one of the things I like to tell all my patients is there's a lot of things that we do not have control over, but you ultimately do decide what goes in your body. So that's something you should always remember when you're making food choices, is that you are ultimately in control of that. So being educated about it and making good decisions. So you need that fuel for your body, for energy, sleeping, walking, breathing, all of those things require good nutrition. But different disease states, different levels of physical activity, different environments can alter what your body might need from a nutrient perspective. So we'll talk a little bit about the things that we want to focus on when we're talking about overall health for ECD. So one of the other things I like to mention is I try really hard not to use the word diet overall. So when we are talking about your general food intake or the foods that you're putting into your body, I don't necessarily like to refer to it as a diet. So a preferable term would be a healthy eating pattern. That sounds a little bit less restrictive. It's really trying to encourage the fact that you want to overall eat well, and it's not so much things that you should have or things that you can't have, but what are the things that are best for you. So what I took are some principles of our Dietary Guidelines. This is the latest edition, 2015 to 2020. These are guidelines that are developed by the USDA, as well as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And they're general guidelines for an adult population, but they can be extrapolated and applied to a lot of different disease states. But for the overall adults, there are some guidelines, and we use those to base, and it's based off of research, of what are the general principles. What are the things that we need to think about most when we're talking about our health from a food perspective? And then we use those to help govern certain things. How are food labels made? What are the recommendations that dietitians tell patients about what they should or shouldn't be eating? So this is a big general guideline. It's updated every 5 years. It's a very lengthy publication. I did provide at the end of the talk the link. You can order it in PDF form should you ever need some light reading for bedtime. But they do have some general guidelines. So what I put here are the most general and useful information. So what they talk about are the things that you want to include in your intake. So you want your intake to be a variety of vegetables, everyone's favorites, from all different subgroups. So we're talking about lots of different colors. So one of the other things that we always tell patients too is you want your plate to have a variety of different nutrients, and you can be sure of that if your plate has a lot of different colors on it. So you want vegetables from the dark greens to your reds to your oranges, fruits from the same type, different colors there. And notice that they do say fruits, especially whole fruits, meaning that in contrast to just fruit juice. So talking about the actual fruit in its entirety. Grains, important part of the diet, again in the media and in the public eye, carbohydrates, grains get a lot of bad rep these days. But I do want to point out that it is considered as part of the Dietary Guidelines a very healthy and important part of your overall intake, but with the stipulation that it says at least half from whole grains. So we're talking about whole wheat bread versus white bread, brown rice versus white rice. And then it also includes fat-free or low-fat dairy products. So things like, yes, milk, but also things like yogurt, cheese in moderation, but other sources of some valuable nutrients there. And then it says a variety of protein foods, and I found it interesting that the first protein that they list in the Dietary Guidelines is actually seafood. So you'll notice, I think that's not unintentional, the way that they list the items. So seafood, lean meats, poultry, eggs, legumes, so things like beans, and other protein sources that are non-animal, such as nuts, seeds, and any other soy products. And then they also include oils in there. So again, fat being another important part of your general intake. So those are the most basic guidelines of the things that you want to be doing. And then it also talks about things that you want to be doing less of. So again, remember, it doesn't say none of. It doesn't say you can't ever have this, but they're very careful to word it of things that you want to watch and limit. So saturated fats and trans fats, added sugars and sodium being the biggest ones that they talk about in the guidelines. So there's some actual numbers here. So you want less than 10% of calories to come from added sugars. So what they mean by added sugars are products that then have sugar added to it once it's been made. So not naturally occurring sugar, such as the whole fruits that they talked about before, so added sugars. And then you want to consume less than 10% of your calories a day from the saturated fats. So those are the fats that are a little bit less healthy for the heart, can cause some cardiovascular disease, bad for the arteries, as opposed to monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. And then they make an actual guideline for sodium as well. And over the years, this number has sort of waxed and waned. It's changed. It was 2,400 for a while. Now we're at 2,300. So this is why they update the guidelines every 5 years. So this is the most recent guidelines, is 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. So if you ever pay attention to those food labels when you're purchasing a product that's already been prepared and you look on the back, oftentimes a lot of products, especially if it's something that has that nutrition label that's been processed, has a decent amount of sodium intake on it. And if your guideline is to consume less than 2,300 milligrams a day, you gotta be real wary of that when you're thinking about products that you're eating, because if you're having something that's 800, 900 milligrams of sodium per serving, you can very quickly get to that 2,300 milligrams a day. So that's something to watch for sure. And then they actually make some stipulations about alcohol as well. So it says if alcohol is consumed, so again, they didn't say you can't, they didn't say you should, they said if you do, these are some guidelines. So no more than 1 drink a day per women and 2 drinks per day for men. So those are the guidelines of the things that you want to limit. So why are these important? Where does this come from? The research that they do, why do they come up with these numbers? They're not just arbitrary. Well, actually, research has shown that vegetables and fruits are associated with a reduced risk in many chronic diseases. So in talking about prevention and health wellness, the diet higher in fruits and vegetables is shown to have less chronic diseases. Now, why is that? Can we tease out one particular nutrient that makes that happen? We haven't yet. If not, we'd all be taking it all the time. But there's something to do with the synergy of the nutrients that you're eating together in the whole food form, and that diets that are high in fruits and vegetables are higher in fiber, higher in certain micronutrients, like certain vitamins and minerals. And so they think that that in combination is what leads to a reduced risk of chronic diseases. But a caveat too to think is lifestyle choices in general, as Diane also spoke about. If your diet is high in fruits and vegetables, chances are you're more health conscious, you may be moving more, you may have other stress reducing activities in your life. So that's why it's hard to sort of tease out in any nutritional studies, was it one particular nutrient that did one thing or the other, because you have to consider it as part of the whole. But we do know that eating more fruits and vegetables reduce the risk in several things like cancer and also cardiovascular disease. And that's really important when we're talking about heart health overall, especially with ECD, is making sure that you're doing everything you can in your power for how you feel your body to keep your heart healthy as well. It also, research shows that those whole grains help reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. So that's why that recommendation saying that the grain should be at least half of them whole is also for that benefit. And then there's also research that suggests that dairy intake does indeed affect bone health, particularly in adolescents and children, but that's also true for adults. So it's important to incorporate that in your diet as well. And we'll leave, like I said, a little time for questions at the end, but there are some options too for lactose-free or any other dietary intolerances. So this is the guideline, the basic model that we use to really sum up those principles we just talked about. Really simple. It's a plate, and this is what it should look like when you eat. So as you can see, it's got half of it fruits and vegetables. Just a quarter of it is the meat. And then you've got your grains up here and a side of dairy. So now compare that to, say, you go to a Brazilian steakhouse and you have all those meats coming around. Does the plate look like that? Not even close. Exactly. So this is the picture you want to keep in your mind, and it seems very simplistic, but if you think about that, you keep that in the back of your mind every time you're making a food selection, when you fill your plate here at lunch, when you make choices and you're eating at home, when you go out to a restaurant, you really want the majority of that plate to be filled with those fruits and vegetables, those colorful items. You can still have your meats, you can still have your dairy, but you want to make sure that you're incorporating all of those nutrients and really trying to load up on the fruits and veggies. Okay? So this is a good little visualization to keep in mind. So now how does that apply directly to ECD? Well, unfortunately, just as Patty said in the exercise talk, we don't have any particular, this is the diet you follow. There's not one particular thing that I would say you absolutely have to eat, this will help. There's also not anything I would say that you can't eat, that won't help. So we can just extrapolate some of the data of what we know, and as I said, manage symptoms, manage everybody's individual needs as well, and then make some recommendations from there. So overall, that general healthy eating pattern that we just went over, those principles of the dietary guidelines, is pretty appropriate for most patients. Now, of course, you tease in other things such as other comorbidities, food allergies, food intolerances, food dislikes, all things that will affect the food choices that you make. But as far as general guidelines, those dietary guidelines are a great starting point. And then are there any other modifications that we need to make aside from allergies or any type of consistency modification, difficulty swallowing, weakness, difficulty chewing, anything else that we can do to help promote good overall intake and any changes that we can make to make it easier for the patient. So I included, this is something that's done by the American Heart Association. It's called the Heart Check Mark. And you might notice this too if you're an educated consumer and you're looking at the back section of your products when you shop and looking at that food label. You might also notice that some products will have a heart mark on it, a check mark on the products. And so I wanted to explain a little bit what that is about. And that's by the American Heart Association. And it's recommendations, and they update this list, I believe it's twice a month. So there's several stipulations that products have to comply by in order to be able to carry that mark on their product. They do, on their website, have a bunch of recipes available as well. And so what they look at from the Heart Association standpoint is the markers, in order to be approved for that, are looking at the overall nutrient content of the food. So it has to have a restriction in the amount of sodium that's there. So we already talked about how the sodium, 2,300, I wouldn't say it's restrictive, but it's not a lot. So if you have a product that has this check mark on it, you're going to know it's going to be a lower source of sodium than other foods. They also look at the fat composition of it. So like I said, on that first slide, the foods that you can and want to incorporate, they included oils as part of the fat. But on the limit guidelines, they said limit the things like saturated fat and trans fat. So that takes this into consideration as well. So the fat sources, how much sodium, and then a variety of other nutrients, mostly being B vitamins, fiber, other micronutrients there. So that's what that check mark looks like. So you can pay attention to that next time you're in the grocery store and see if you are regularly buying products that have that mark on there. And as I said, they've got some nice recipes as well. So things to help keep your heart health in check. And then just some other little guidelines as far as bone health, things that we can be concerned about or things to watch. Everyone knows about calcium, and calcium being a very important part of the building blocks of your bone, your teeth, other cell structures as well. And so that calcium, one of the main sources being dairy, but maybe some other products, other food sources you might not be considering, things like green leafy vegetables that are also good sources of calcium. Other products that are fortified with calcium too, that's not uncommon. Maybe you've seen, especially here in Florida when we have a lot of orange juice, a lot of times orange juices can be fortified with calcium, which means they've added it in as well. So that's important for your bone health. And then also vitamin D in conjunction with your calcium. So in order to make most of both of those nutrients. And now again, here being in Florida, everyone talks about vitamin D and that you get it from the sun, but we also heard about the importance of protecting yourself from the sun for several of these medications. So some dietary sources where vitamin D is available are the fattier fishes, so tuna, mackerel, salmon, also in the yolks of eggs. So that's important as well, and I would actually encourage you to make sure that you're checking with your physicians if they've checked a vitamin D level. A lot of research these days is showing that we're actually more deficient in vitamin D than we once thought. So it would be important, and there is supplementation available, but you want to have your level checked before you start to take a supplement. And then other micronutrients that are important for your bone health would be things like magnesium, which I'll talk a little bit more about, vitamin C and K, and other lycopene-rich foods, so things like tomatoes, citrus fruits. The caveat being, I did not include specifically grapefruit on here because, as Cassie talked about, grapefruit oftentimes has a lot of interactions with medications. So you can get your vitamin C from other citrus fruits, such as oranges, like I said, here in Florida. Bell peppers also being another good source. So then shifting gears to how this applies then when you're eating and thinking about your medications, how this plays a role in your overall health when dealing with ECD. I did list some of the medications here. I know Cassie did a nice detailed presentation on that. But what I teased out here were some of the GI or nutritionally related side effects that you might experience from some of these medications. Because as a dietitian, that's what I think about, is as far as your overall health, what are the comorbidities, what is your appetite currently like, what are some barriers that we might see to fueling your body well, and then how do we cope with that from here. So we talked about with the BRAF inhibitors, nausea being one of the potential side effects, medications like the antiemetics to help mitigate some of that. But as Cassie said, make sure you're always talking to your pharmacist, so we're making sure that they've got you on the appropriate antiemetic regimen for whatever medication you're taking. The common side effects of the MEK inhibitors being diarrhea or edema, so fluid retention. So that's where that salt intake comes into play as well. So not just for the overall heart health, but to help prevent any additional fluid accumulation. Also for the interferon, flu-like symptoms. So everyone knows when you have the flu, appetite is one of the first things to go. You don't feel like eating. Decreased appetite can be a real problem. So something that we can do to work on that. And then other fatigues, neuropathy with the vinblastine we talked about too. So with neuropathy, not only just the tingling in the hands and the toes, but constipation can be an issue as well. And constipation can certainly affect your nutritional intake. It's really hard to put things in if things aren't moving out. And on rounds and upstairs, I'm oftentimes known as the poop police because I'm always making sure that everyone is regular so that we can improve their nutritional status. So we have some tips to deal with that as well. And then also, what do we do if you are nauseous? You're still taking the antiemetics, but what can we do from a food perspective? Or if the blood cell count is lower, there's some things that we watch in the diet for that as well. So nausea. Best guidelines for nausea. You're going to notice that one of the overall best suggestions from a food perspective, when in doubt, the answer is small, frequent meals. Okay? So same thing for nausea. If you're feeling a little bit queasy, you're not feeling well, the appetite's not great, it can be very overwhelming to have a large plate of food in front of you. So I just showed that beautiful My Plate model. That's for when you're feeling well, absolutely. But sometimes that's not going to be realistic if the appetite isn't good. So we want to work at getting the nutrients in where you can and spreading them out throughout the day so that you're more likely to cover your needs, get everything that your body requires, even if it's in small sittings. Also, foods that tend to have a little bit of an aroma can be very off-putting when you're feeling a little bit queasy. So we suggest bland foods, things that are closer to room temperature or cold, because then they don't have quite a smell. So you can be very sensitive to smells if you're having nausea. So choosing snacks, foods, prepared items that don't have that heavy aroma. And similarly, not necessarily if you have someone to help, a caregiver, a family, a friend, to help cook or prepare the food, then being out of the kitchen when things are being cooked so you're not getting that aroma, because that can be very triggering for nausea as well. So having some assistance with your meals. And then, of course, the antiemetics, as we said, but then also remembering that it's supposed to be a pleasant experience. Eating isn't always that, but remembering it is part of your treatment as well, but trying to keep the environment relaxing, any other barriers, distractions to a minimum, and then spreading your meals out throughout the day to help with any kind of nausea. And similar principles for fatigue and decreased appetite. So if the appetite really tends to be a struggle and you feel like you're not just getting enough, a couple of other things you can do. Again, there's that small frequent meals again. asking for assistance from family and friends, but then also planning ahead, trying to have some foods on hand, some go-to, some staple items that will provide beneficial nutrition, but aren't exhausting to prepare. Because you may be able to get up and make something to eat, but then by the time you fixed yourself even a sandwich or you fixed yourself a small meal, the moment has passed and you no longer feel like you're hungry to eat it. So things like we mentioned before, yogurt, cottage cheese, those prepackaged cottage cheese with fruit on the side, peanut butter and crackers, something like some string cheese or those little baby bell cheeses. So ideas of snacks that still will give calcium, I mentioned some of those, protein and some of those as well. So things that will still cover your needs, cover the bases, but don't require a lot of work or exhaustion in order to prepare. And then also really working on the nutrient density of your food. So I like to equate this to bargain shopping. If the appetite's not great, there's only so much you can take in. You want to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. So in that instance, if the appetite isn't great, then maybe instead of a fat-free dairy product, maybe a moderate fat dairy product like 2% milk would be preferable over skim if your intake overall is low, so that we make sure that we're still meeting your calorie needs. So making some choices of things so that even if the volume isn't high, the quality is high. So some ideas there if you're having decreased intake. And then as Patty said, up and moving around, physical activity as able, again, helps stimulate the appetite, helps keep the bowels regular as well, and then in turn, hopefully will help you eat a little bit more additionally. Of course, they work in conjunction. The more calories you burn, the more calories you need to take in to maintain your weight, but certainly helping to stimulate the appetite by being up and moving around. And then there's that constipation again. So again, a big barrier oftentimes to the appetite. So what can you do from a food perspective to try to help mitigate that? You want to make sure you're drinking plenty of fluids. So fiber-containing foods are the foods that help keep you regular. Fiber is good for the digestion overall. But if you're eating a lot of high-fiber foods and not enough liquids, it's not going to feel good and it's not going to pass well. So you want to make sure you're constantly staying hydrated. So that can be in the form of water, but then also things that are naturally sweet. So we talked about not adding a lot of added sugars, but things that do contain natural sugar tend to stimulate the bowels. So that's why we give patients, when they're constipated, prune juice. That's the rationale behind that. So it doesn't necessarily have to even be prune juice. It could be apple juice, something that's naturally sweetened like that. And then water, you can flavor your water with a little citrus fruit, even something like a little Crystal Light, or something to get you to drink water if plain water is a struggle for you. Find something that helps make it a little bit more appetizing, a little bit more appealing. And a lot of times it's just access to it. Just bringing your water bottle with you. Especially here in Florida in the summertime, we have to be very careful about that because of fluid losses. So you want to make sure you just always have some hydration handy. And then the insoluble fiber foods, so those are the type of foods we're talking about with the skins of the fruits and vegetables, the things that help promote that bowel motility. So things that move through, mostly undigested, to help keep things passing. So think about like skins of tomato, corns, beans, those type of products. But again, with the caveat that you need proper hydration with that as well, so that everything can move through smoothly. So then the flip side of that is what if you're going to the bathroom too much, or you're having too frequent of bowel movements. So what do you do to help from a food perspective for that? Well, again, fluids play a really important role here because now you might be losing more fluid. So you want to be careful about replacing that so you don't become dehydrated. And then this is when you want to incorporate soluble fiber foods. So that's opposite of the insoluble. So insoluble, like I said, are the things like the skins of the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains. Soluble fibers are things like pectins, so like the inside of the fruit. So apple sauce, so the inside of the apple rather than the skin of the apple. Things like bananas, things like rice. Does anybody know the T in brat there? It's actually toast, yeah, so toast. And again, the toast being probably white toast, because the wheat toast, which is generally a healthy thing to do, but if you're having diarrhea, that's the insoluble fibers. You want more of a white bread for that, for the soluble fibers. So that's what the BRAT diet stands for, is bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. So those are just some food things that you can do if you're frequently going to the bathroom. Some other things that fit in well with there, tapioca pudding, because the little beads of tapioca can be gel forming too, so sometimes that can be helpful. And even though this is an added sugar, marshmallows. Marshmallows tend to help when all else fails. Go figure. So I wouldn't say eat that regularly, but if you were in a bind or trying to get a bind. So, and then, as we said, the things that are naturally sweet tend to make things go faster. So as we give prune juice for constipation, you probably want to limit the sweetened items or even the naturally sweet items if you are going frequently. So being careful of that. And again, keeping up with the fluids, maybe even a little electrolyte replacement, which I'll touch on as well, as another one of the nutrients that we watch in case you're losing some potassium, which can be lost in your stool output. And so here we are with the electrolyte replacement. So sources of potassium. So if your potassium tends to run on the low side, and I know Cassie talked about this too, as far as preventing arrhythmias, because that's a concern with some of the medications, the MEK inhibitors. Then some good sources of potassium, things like bananas, oranges, apricots, basically those orange, yellowish color fruits, potatoes, white potatoes as well, tomatoes. And then I also provided a link, this is from the Nutrition Care Manual, and I'll give you my information as well if anybody has additional questions. There's a whole list of potassium foods and the exact amount of potassium per food, but those are really the high ticket items, would be things like bananas, oranges, orange juice as well. And then magnesium, again, as far as helping to prevent arrhythmias, making sure that your magnesium sources are high. You can find that in things like beans, so all types of beans. So white beans, black beans, navy beans. And remember, those are the insoluble fibers. They also count towards your protein source, so that's for when you're feeling well or if you're having issues with constipation, you might want to limit that if you're having diarrhea. But then things like avocado, that's a great source of magnesium, also has a little bit of protein. Spinach, those green vegetables, peanut butter because of nuts and seeds. And then I put on there too pumpkin seeds because we weren't that far from Halloween and we got Thanksgiving coming. And eggnog actually is a great source of magnesium, so in keeping with the holidays, I went ahead and put that one on there too. With or without your alcohol in it, as we said, the guidelines are no more than 1 per day. And then neutropenia, this is just something I'll touch on briefly because it's not something we're real big sticklers on, but because some of the treatments can alter your blood count, particularly your white blood cell count, and we saw that some of the potential side effects of these medications are risk of infection. So that comes and plays a part in food as well. So a normal healthy body whose immune system is intact might be able to tolerate a little bit of bacteria on fruits or vegetables or uncooked foods, and that's something you just want to be careful about when you're under active treatment. So if your white blood cell count is low, you just really want to be careful that you're following safe food handling procedures. The guidelines have loosened over the years, so we don't really necessarily follow a strict neutropenic diet, which is what it's called, if your absolute neutrophil count is under 500. But things, common sense things, wash everything very well. Make sure everybody's washing their hands around you. Don't keep leftovers for more than 3 days in your refrigerator. Store your food properly at the proper temperature. Make sure your refrigerator is cold enough. Don't defrost your meat on the kitchen counter. You want to take it from the freezer to the fridge. Important with Thanksgiving coming up, be careful about defrosting the turkeys. And then making sure, if you are at risk for being coming into contact with bacteria or having an infection, just making sure things stay in your control and in your environment. Something like soft serve ice cream, which generally isn't a bacteria harboring food, but if you get it from a place that serves soft serve that hasn't cleaned the inside of their machine in some time, then that could potentially be a barrier and could be a source of infection there. So just being safe, avoiding things that are completely raw that tend to be higher potential of bacteria, so things like sushi, eggs, you want them to be well cooked. So just some common sense, good, safe practices. And then the only other thing I would touch on quickly, because I know we're running out of time, is there are still some strategies as well, if you have a mechanical function with eating, swallowing, chewing problems, then focusing on softer foods, being creative, making things moist with sauces and gravies. You can get double fold with that, getting some extra calories in there as well. Always make sure you're taking your time when you're chewing, alternating bites of your food with sips of liquids. And then I know Allison spoke earlier, I unfortunately wasn't here to hear her talk, but meeting with a speech pathologist is part of your interdisciplinary team as well. So I included the link for those dietary guidelines. Like I said, they're quite lengthy, but you're welcome to look at them there. And then I'm happy to take any questions. I provided my email too if you want to shoot any questions my way. I thank you very much for having me, and I hope this was helpful to you. Unfortunately, I'm being told no time for questions, but I'm happy to stick around for a few moments. Also, my email is available, so I'm happy to answer anything I can, or at least point you in the right direction. The other resource that I put here, I work here with the hospital inpatient, but on our website for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, there is a search engine that you can search by zip code for a registered dietitian in your area as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.